this is a time of like low certainty, and I think you should embrace the uncertainty, because the more confident somebody is, the more likely that they're full of shit or wrong or whatever. There's an interesting angle here. Like, the more successful the company, the less urgency. Like, if you already have a monopoly, if you're already the big dog in a space, you don't feel existential dread, because I don't want to say you're asleep at the cash register, but it's kind of like that. You don't feel this immense threat. And perhaps that's because it's not coming, or perhaps you don't notice it until it's too late.
AutoSkills helps teams go from AI curious to AI ready. We run tailored workshops to uncover where AI has the biggest impact in your business, whether that's automating repetitive tasks, cutting hours out of your daily workflows, or choosing the right mix of tools and custom solutions. It's practical, hands-on, and built to get your team using AI for work that matters. Book your free 30-minute AI readiness audit at autoskills.ai. When ChatGPT launched, Traynor knew Intercom's product playbook was obsolete. As co-founder and chief strategy officer, he had to move a 1,000-person company, and he had to move it fast. In 15 days, they shipped their first generative AI feature. 8 weeks later came Finn, the AI support bot now resolving 60% of customer conversations and on track to be a $100 million business. But the real story is what was happening inside Intercom during this time. Roadmaps ripped up, org charts flattened, designers writing production code. This is what Des calls constructive chaos. In this conversation, Des shares what it takes to rewire a mature product org for AI, the cultural shocks that come with moving this fast, and why harmony and predictability can actually hold you back. Listen for practical lessons you can take to your own team: how to organize for speed without breaking trust, how to ship before certainty arrives, and how to lead through the chaos AI demands. If you enjoy the conversation, hit subscribe so you don't miss future episodes with leaders on the front lines of AI adoption. So Des, Intercom went from 25% to 51% AI resolution rates. It grew its revenue 25% year over year. And this was arguably one of the most decisive and successful AI pivots that we've ever seen. Can you take us back to the 15-day sprint, the code red after ChatGPT launched?
Yeah, certainly. So everyone remembers where they were, I think, when ChatGPT launched, or at least when they first played with it, right? It was, I think, November 30th or 29th, 2022. And like, obviously, a lot of us are busy on Twitter. A lot of us would follow Sam Altman anyway. So when you see him share a link, you're like, oh, cool, click the link, have a play. I think it was pretty obvious early on, like, this thing is kind of cool. And then, like, kind of like the rest of us, I have meetings, I have shit to do. So you kind of like get back to your email and you whatever. But like, it was kind of lingering in the back of my mind. And then it was our head of AI, Fergal, our chief AI officer. He basically jumped in and was like, yo, I think you should take a look at this. And I was like, I kind of had a look at it. Looks cool, but I haven't had time to play with it. Then he sent me, I think, a couple of screenshots of things he was doing with it. And one of the screenshots he sent was, how do you install Intercom on a mobile app? And the answer was correct. And I was like, wow. Then I was like, for what's worth, I did not really understand what large language models were before. I had been, like a lot of people, in the OpenAI playground on a lot of their prior work. I guess it was like GPT-2 or something. I'd been like seeing how it can do really nice autocompletes, but I wasn't getting anywhere. Like, it wasn't seeing this type of value. But once I saw it answer a legitimate support question, I was like, this could be interesting / scary / terrifying. And then obviously, I think our CTO, or our founding CTO, Kieran, sent me a message that evening being like, have you played with this? And I was like, yeah. And I met with Fergal the following morning, which I think was a Friday morning. And he kind of convinced me there's definitely something here, like something existential, perhaps. I spoke with Owen, who's our CEO, and we chatted through the weekend. Fergal continued to, like, how to say, advance his confidence that this really mattered. And we realized now it's, I don't want to like try to tell the story in pure rosy terms. There was still, we all learned the phrase hallucinations back then, right? Or ungrounded inferences or whatever. So there was definitely ways in which this was giving wrong answers. And that was why we made the decision. Well, so first decision we made was we have to build with this technology to really understand it. And we have to build really fast, because, if Zendesk worked this out before us, we're in trouble. So we immediately started work on some basic, what you'd now call kind of like just augmentation style features inside the inbox that let support reps do things like summarize conversation, rephrase, expand, change the language, the basic things that like GPT 3.5 was still pretty good at. We shipped that in 15 days. And to do that, obviously that meant ripping up the roadmap, telling a lot of teams, hey, we know what you're going to do. You're not going to do that anymore. We've got this new thing. It's really important. And we released that pretty quickly. The uptake was strong. We had this extremely viral tweet where everyone was just like, I think we were genuinely, to my mind, we were the first like proper SaaS company that put generative AI software features in production. And somewhere in the middle of January, like this feature was clearly really popular. People loved it. We were just calling it Inbox AI at the time. It didn't really have a name. Somewhere in the middle of January or early February, we got early access to GPT-4. And that was when Fergal gave us a demonstration. He said, hey, look, here's what I've had this thing do. I've had it read 5 BBC articles and just, it has never seen them before. We've stored them we previously had a RAG powered product before. So we used that tech. We broke it up so we could actually just do proper search. And he's like, so I've asked the things that are definitely in the article, things that are definitely not, things that are reasonably grounded inferences, things that are definitely outside of scope. I've tried to get it to go off topic. I've tried to get it to stay on topic. I've tried to get it to have opinions it shouldn't have. And it works. And that was the real holy shit moment where it was like, it does appear like there is a technology that can consume vast quantities of information and answer specific, detailed, tough, intricate questions based on multiple sources of information. And we need to release this as a product. So it was about 8 weeks later, it was March 2023, we brought Fin out to the wild. And at the time when we launched it, we did boast that it had a 25% resolution rate. Sitting here today now, I think it's a 62% resolution rate. It's gone up pretty rapidly as we've been like basically just making it better, moving from architectural choice to architectural choice, from model to model, you name it, right? But yeah, that was the sort of the story. It was a very, very manic start. And then honestly, since then, internally within Intercom, we've been kind of just cleaning up the residue of the blast. Like our org chart still makes no sense. We're still all over the place. We're just working on work streams. Like we're not, but what team is somebody on? I don't know. They don't know. Their manager doesn't know. We're just kind of like, we have to kind of forgo all of the big company structure to basically enable the sort of constructive mayhem of a startup. And I think we did that bit pretty successfully.
Wow, yeah, it's very impressive. I didn't realize the 62% number. I'm not sure if I saw that online, but that's incredible. And you said that March 2023 was when you launched Fin, and this was after there was a call to arms during the GPT-4 launch. So that's about a 2 month period.
We shipped that in 15 days. And to do that, obviously that meant ripping up the roadmap, telling a lot of teams, hey, we know what you're going to do. You're not going to do that anymore. We've got this new thing. It's really important. And we released that pretty quickly. The uptake was strong. So we actually launched Fin on GPT-4 launch day when GPT-4 was available to the public, which I think was like March 13th, I want to say. That was the day we put Fin out. It was out in beta, to be clear. But that was when we first announced it to the world. And we then, obviously, we went into full GA, if you like, in July 2023.
And how many employees were you at that time?
Is in internal headcount entirely? Well, the answer is probably somewhere between 900 and 1,000, but that's not really probably what you're getting at. I would say, like, you have to bear in mind, Intercom, we also have this help desk product that competes with Zendesk and, Freshworks and all those sort of things. A lot of people were still working on that. We probably had, from a software engineering perspective, maybe 50 people were working on the first version of Fin. Today, it's far higher.
Got it. And so that 2 month period, what did it look like? How did you rally the troops to get this out in time?
We decided to launch on the GPT-4 launch day because we thought, like, hey, much like we were the first people to be out there with proper live generative AI software, we thought, wouldn't it be cool if we could piggyback their launch with basically our launch? And we spoke with OpenAI, and they're like, yeah, if you do that, like, it would be good for us too, because they'll be able to like sort of say, not only is this cool, see here for a live example of how it works, or whatever, and that would be cool for us. So that was the kind of motivation. After that, the rallying of the troops was really like, I often say internally, if you like the buzz and hype pitch, I can tell you that if we can nail this Fin opportunity, we can be a massive, massive company and the only dominant player in CS. If you respond better to fear, I can say that if we don't nail this opportunity, we'll probably be dead in 2 years. It's kind of like, whichever your hype speech is, we have one for you. And like both are true in my opinion. But the rallying call at the time, I don't think it was at the times like, there's a difference in perspective when you think this is a tool that can do 25% of your total support volume versus today where it's 60% or 62%. But at the time, our argument was, well, look, if any support leader out there hears about a thing that makes a quarter of their work go away, they're going to buy it. And I think like Probably our biggest mistake at the time was we made Fin only available to Intercom customers. We've since rectified that. Now you can use Fin on Zendesk or Fin on Salesforce or HubSpot or Freshworks or whatever you want. But that was the only thing I think we got deeply wrong at the time. We should have pushed harder on that idea of making Fin available everywhere. But yeah, the rallying of the troops was just entirely down to like, look, think about the opportunity when we can replace all this work.
Yeah, and this code red moment is something that I've heard across a bunch of different companies. The companies that seem to do the best at dealing with this existential threat, as you described it, are the ones that sound the sirens. And so I'm curious, like, what else separates a company that survives or even thrives amidst this existential event versus the companies that don't?
Yeah, and obviously I invest in a lot of startups, so I've seen varying different reactions. And I think there's an interesting angle here. Like the more successful the company, the less urgency. Like if you already have a monopoly, if you're already the big dog in a space, you don't feel existential dread because I don't want to say you're asleep at the cash register, but it's kind of like that. You don't feel this immense threat. And perhaps that's because it's not coming, or perhaps you don't notice it until it's too late. But, for what it's worth, customer service is just so much in the obvious sort of kill zone of AI that we were faced with a very grave choice very early. But I think there's a few things that are really important here. One is like a really decisive CEO. And I really like what all I mean by that, like this is not me trying to like, give Owen our CEO like a crazy amount of credit, but um it's really important that you have a CEO who can understand the magnitude of what's happening, understand the nature of disruptive innovation in the sort of Clay Christensen sense, but then also make a strong decision. I think the safest decision that I see so many companies make is, huh, that's a cool little demo. Let's put 4 people on that and we'll call it a labs project and we'll see what they show up at Christmas with. And we'll be like, ooh, isn't that cool? And we might even release a little hacky video saying, look what we built. Anyway, everybody back to work, and we'd go back to building a help desk. I think that's the safe sounding, easy, familiar decision that doesn't involve frustrating people, disappointing people, ripping up roadmaps, reorgs, all the sort of pain that you have to go through. I think honestly, like the phrase that I've settled on it, this is you kind of have to go too far to know that you've gone far enough when it comes to adapting to AI. You have to really be willing to, whatever your burn the boats or whatever your favorite phrase is for this, but really commit to doing what the thing you're doing is. I think you need to do that. You need a CEO who's got a lot of like kind of just deep bravery, but that's not sufficient either. You also need a culture that takes change. I think a lot of coming out of say Zurich and coming out of the sort of just era, the last whatever 10 years, there's bits of like probably DEI and stuff in this as well. But like I think there's a real sense of like the most important thing a company should be is harmonious and safe and stable. And like anything that disrupts the sort of the vibe is really dangerous too. And thankfully we had been through periods of like significant change since Owen's return. So this was like we had kind of grown a culture that was familiar with change, familiar with like strong decisions quickly made. So as a result, we kind of just got on board and acted very quickly with great urgency and certainty. It's sort of another observation I've seen startups fail on here is even if the CEO makes the strong decision, they then enter a period of negotiation with the employees where it gets discussed and ultimately it gets delayed and diluted. So it's like, I was going to put 100% of the team on this thing. And then after discussion with the head of product, it's actually only going to be 20% and we're not going to do it till Q4. And like, that's effectively the same thing as not doing it. There's a lot more to this. Obviously, you need an AI lab. There's a lot of like other things. You need to actually have a product vision for what your software does in a period where, post AI, if AI is doing the work, what do you sell, etc. There's a lot you have to figure out there. But I do think like the decision making at the top and then the speed of response from the culture, like do they get with it or do they fight against it? I think a lot of those things are where I see even today startups still deeply struggling or like twisting themselves in knots trying to like hedge their bets, etc.
Yeah, it sounds like a strong leadership is something that's really important during these times. And what is the most common type of pushback that you've seen either at Intercom or other companies that you either invest in or work with when it comes to AI adoption?
Yeah, I mean, everything I'm going to say sounds really reasonable and rational. Like it's never like these people aren't idiots when they say these things. The pushback you'll see is like, we're just about to finish this project. Can you let us finish it? And then we'll get on the AI train. That's a very reasonable thing to say. It also might cost you your entire company, but it's a very reasonable thing to say. Another one is like, you wanted to do this big reorg, but like we've got 25 engineers starting over the next quarter. How about we make them the team that builds the new AI stuff? Again, sounds reasonable, right? It means you don't have to go around shuffling people around, breaking up manager employee relationships, all sorts of stuff, right? But But again, that just means that your newest people who are least onboarded are going to be, you know, working on the most important thing your company faces. Again, very reasonable thing to say, very painful thing if you make that decision because you'll probably die. And like there'll be other versions of it, like, hey, what about our brand? Our customers don't want this. That's a very common thing, right? As in, hey, I've surveyed all, and again, I'm not trying to like ridicule the people here. These are all reasonable things. I talked to all our customers. None of them want AI. That's fine. Again, that could be true. And also, you could kill your company following your advice because the customers for your new product might not be here yet. Or maybe your current customers would just change your mind in 6 months. I find I'd love it if I could just say, oh, they're all idiots and they just don't get it. That's not it at all. They actually often do get it to a degree. They might not get the severity or the urgency or the magnitude, but they're ultimately like a lot of what it comes down to is like, can I in some way reduce the short term impact of the change because it'll be extremely painful for the company, the people, the processes, the customers, the product. It's all very, very valid downside. And that's true. But like when you're facing the existential questions about the future of like a large company, you have to accept that pain is going to happen. And actually, if you somehow got through this whole period without pain, without stress, without late nights and weekends, you've probably just lied to yourself and done nothing. Is would be my guess because it is just a really really hard thing to bulldoze through, and people won't like it. But I wouldn't say we're the far side of all this, but like the numbers would suggest, like we're on pace to hit 100 million in fin revenue this year, for example, or sorry, early next year. Um, Fins resolved over like 30 million conversations. Like it's very clear now the product was a very good idea and we should have committed the way we did. But you can't wait for that level of conviction. You have to, it would be convenient if all these numbers were here in November 2022, but they're not. That's the bet.
I can't help but think about what you mentioned about Fergal trying out this technology super early on, right? And that's like a common pattern that I'm seeing across a bunch of the conversations that we're having is the folks that are the most successful end up being very hands-on and experimental. And clearly that paid off in ways that may not even be fathomable right now, if we're thinking about the trajectory that Intercom is on as a company. On an employee level, how do you instill that sort of culture of experimentation and leaning into this wave, not just from a perspective of working on the right products and working towards this new pivot, but also becoming AI enabled themselves? Is that something that has been a big focus for the company?
Yeah, definitely. And again, we've done well, but like we got a lot wrong. We've always prided ourselves on being a good product org. I think history would have borne that out with some of our earlier innovations, etc. But we had a pretty good process by which we were able to build a lot of stuff to high quality. And we obsessed about design. We were really proud of like the quality of Intercom software. And all of these things are counterintuitively wrong in a period of AI. So the pain that we have to go through is like really truly just ripping up all of our processes and saying like this is not how we build anymore. And just yeah, I know you get this, but for the sake of maybe listeners who've not gone through all the pain, I'll just explain some examples. So historically, Intercom would have been a company where we would say deeply understand the problem that the user has. You do this through like jobs to be done research, and you would then work with your designer to basically come up with the optimum solution, like what would really nail the job to be done, and ultimately solve the problem to the degree and along the same metrics that the customer cares about. Present that back to the customer. When we're happy, you'd move into build. The build phase is high certainty. We know exactly what we're building. We know how to build it usually and deploy it, and then kind of wait for the roses to land on the stage because it was we did all our work up front and we got it right. And literally that entire thing just does not work in a period of AI. And I think that's the thing that I see a lot of companies not getting right is that I'll take a minor detour. Here's the way a lot of companies go wrong. They follow that exact process. They have a brilliant design for something that really does truly solve a problem and uses a shitload of generative AI and they feel great about it. And they take the design and they start building and they get it kind of half working and they have like a nice golden path demo. Like as in if you follow a select set of steps, this thing will definitely work really well and you'll be blown away. And they record the demo and the screencast of that and they share that with the media and they put it on their homepage and they feel so proud about all this, but they actually can't make it work reliably. And they never do, they never can. And that's the reality of the AI period. There's just, we're not used to uncertainty in software production, And there's a massive amount of uncertainty in whether or not you can ever actually get these things to perform at an acceptable level. And if you follow your old process, you'll end up with this massive marketing overhang. To some degree, if you look at where Apple are right now with Apple Intelligence, they probably had some cool stuff working. And then when they had to apply either security guardrails or whatever it was to it, they realized, shit, we actually can't do any of this. And instead, they're just releasing emoji builders and shit like that, right? But like, it's like you have this marketing overhang where you've promised the sun, moon, and stars, and all you have is like a very, very small subset of those features. So the new approach we had to shift to, which doesn't suit anyone, like, an Intercom historically, like a product manager was the ruler of the roost in terms of what we do, etc. You actually start off with what's possible. We have to start off with, like, what do we think we can reliably do? And then you work out what, given these skills and tech, like, can we summarize conversations? Yeah. Can we identify similar topics? Yeah. Can we guess the topic of a conversation? Can we work out the user's true intent? Can we have a back and forth to find the most answerable? These are all little bits of skills that you find out that the AI can do. And then you sort of say, hey, how do I stitch all this together to deliver something that solves a problem the user has? Which means you're kind of working technology first, as opposed to, like, for like 20 years, we were told, start with the user and work backwards. Yes, you just can't do that as much. I mean, sure, you can start with the user and work out what their problems are. But before you decide to solve the problem, you have to work out, like, what are all the ingredients that we have and what can we do with high certainty? Like, a lot of people in the early days of Fin would have accused it of being a type of a thin wrapper, right? Fin is not a thin wrapper. It's like a 27 component subset. The 27 different systems add up together to make Fin. Every one of those systems has to be extremely performant, because if they're only like 95% performant, well, 0.95 to the power of 26 is not a reliable system at all, right? So you have all of these new things you have to think about. So that's why you start with the technology first. What can we definitely do? How do we apply that to user problems? And then how do we identify something at the trading zone between AI capability and genuine user demand, kind of modulated by the requirement that it has to perform at a certain level. Like, some things have to perform 100%, some things you can get away with 95% or whatever, right? So that's the transition our entire R&D org has had to go through. Engineering managers, product managers, designers, they've all had to shuffle around their roles because we basically can't work the way that we used to. And I think a lot of companies haven't accepted that painful trade-off yet.
And one of the things that we hear a lot is this analysis paralysis around the tooling that's available in the space, or as you described, the different ingredients that are available. How do you reconcile working with the technology that's available today when there's an OpenAI or Anthropic Dev Day right around the corner, right? And so, how do you build something that is feasible while still leaving room for expansion once the latest model is able to maybe reduce hallucination rates in some regards?
Yeah, so there's a few aspects to that. Like, the first thing I'd say, and I don't like saying this, but it is true. You just have to play the game when it's being played. So, like, maybe OpenAI will release something, maybe they won't. But like, the here and now is still being fought. Like, waiting isn't a strategy, right? But then separately, like, obviously, if you form a good relationship with the actual the model builders, you can usually get access to betas. You usually get a sense of what areas are they scratching and sniffing in. And so, like, when we were building a Fin voice, one of the things we did was like, hey, we asked everyone, like, who's got anything coming in voice? Like, we want to make a big splash in voice. What do y'all got? And sometimes they'll say nothing and release something. Sometimes they'll say, actually, we're working hard on that. And if we know they're working hard on it, we'll say, well, so are we. So what are our options here? Do you want us to work at absence? Do you want to put us on a beta? Can you at least tell us directionally what type of capability you're thinking of providing? And you can sort of adapt your roadmap based on that. But I think, like, analysis paralysis can mean two things. It can mean, like, we're either so deeply unsure about the technological landscape that we just are afraid to start doing anything. I think that's kind of wrong. You have to be moving. It's kind of, you'll drown if not. But the other side of it could mean, like, hey, we wasted a lot of time making a decision here because we weren't sure if GPT-4 would, or GPT-5 would drop and offer this capability or whatever. I think those things, like, it will happen. Like, you can spend a lot of time working on something only to realize it was profitable in the next release. And I think that's a trade-off. But, like, that's kind of like if you're building on iOS, you can have a great idea for a product only to realize that Apple released it 2 days later. It's like, it's kind of the nature of software in some sense if you're building on a platform.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, I want to shift gears a little bit to talk about the R&D ROI that your team has achieved. So I believe your R&D output initiative was to 2x your output on the R&D side. Did that work? And what exactly were you measuring?
Yeah, sure. So it's not done yet, in the sense that when we sent, when Dara, our CTO, sent the memo, he gave us till February 1st to do it. We're probably, I was actually just speaking with him about this yesterday. We estimate we're running at about 1.35x right now. And I'll just speak to a few aspects of that. The thing that we're ultimately measuring, and by the way, everyone's going to like, scream at me for saying this, or whatever. We're measuring throughput from a point of view of like, I think it's like pull requests that got deployed to become live working software that actually executed. So like, it is true you can game that, but it's quite hard to game, and you'd have to go quite a ways or around the house to try and game that. And then separate to that, we also rely on the fact that our pull requests are obviously peer reviewed by other people at the company. So if they see, hey, you're doing a lot of work to run a load of pointless code in the background here, why are you doing that? Like, I'd hope that we'll catch you through that. But like, look, all measures are flawed, and certainly Goodhart's law applies here. Like, once a measure becomes a target, it ceases its function as a measure. We totally get all that. We're going to this eyes wide open on all of that. But our goal is to double the productivity of the R&D org, not just the engineering, the entire R&D org. And we've loads of different arrows in our quiver to sort of attack this. One recent one, we set a target that by the end of August, I think it was, every single designer in the company should be able to commit and should have committed working production changes. And these are designers. Most of our designers were not coders or engineers coming into Intercom. But we hit that about a week ago, and we shared something about it on LinkedIn. And like, that sounds, are these big changes? No, they're not massive changes. We don't have designers building huge new features, but think about the paper cuts that an engineer faces when like, in production, when they're like, hey, they've got like 11 whatever Jira issues or linear tickets, or whatever, saying fix the padding on this, fix the this on that, and like, those things are all painful. And now all of that work is taken care of entirely within the design org. That's like one simple example of like a substantial change. And again, if you look at any of these, you'll be like, oh, that's a 6 minute. Is that really a big deal? It's not 6 minutes when you're interrupting a principal engineer who's actually on something far more important. It's at least a 15 minute to work. What do you ask me to do? Okay, let me watch that deploy. So like, there's like a load of stuff like that that actually matters. Then on the engineering side, obviously there's like adopting Claude Code. There's like, getting really good at that, running internal training on how to use it. We're looking at tools for, say, like automated QA, automated stuff like Devon for like, simple fixes. We're looking at I think actually pull request review is a area like we're evaluating a good couple of tools in, and there's a few more. But like, I think there'll be an ask on like engineers to just, yes, adopt the latest and greatest of like AI coding or AI engineering. Designers should learn how to code and take away all the paper cuts. We should adopt tooling wherever we want to strip away all the like the grunt work, if you like, of engineering, the stuff that's pretty, how would you say, easily attackable with AI and not high value. It's not where an engineer differentiates themselves. I think they're probably the three biggest approaches. We have product managers working on some stuff. We've changed how we design, because again, like, it's throughput. Like, it's not just a function of like engineer hand on keyboard. It can be like, how quickly did we converge on the right design? So when we were building our insights product, for example, we have like a lot of extremely fancy UI for our insights product. Loads of like dynamic visualizations. I haven't seen stuff like this before. Um, that probably would have taken a lot longer to do in Figma than it did in practice, generating prototypes through things like Lovable or any of those types of tools, where you can sort of give it a description and the designers did this, not the engineers. And they kept hacking at it until they got something that they could actually test. Like, that's real fancy sparkline overlay, dynamic line charts, all sorts of fancy shit, right? And again, hard to do, extra hard to do if it's a designer dragging lines around Figma, but actually quite quick to do. And what's the end point to all this? Well, if the designers can converge on the best design quicker, that actually is another way we can increase throughput. Similarly, like, product managers are using AI to like summarize, dozens or hundreds of like user research interviews, and analyze all the feedback, etc. So like, there's like lots of other things that actually drive us to move faster. All of this we hope will add up to 2x, but we intend to report back on that probably at the end of January.
That's fascinating and a lot to unpack there. I definitely want to dig into how you facilitated the upskilling of the designers, product managers, engineers, so that they can lean into those tools. I find that it's much easier with engineers and a little bit tougher with the EP side of things. But before we dig into that, I have a quick question for you on the tooling side. You mentioned you're looking into tools for reviewing pull requests and you're using Claude Code. I'm curious, what are your favorite tools AI tools that may not have been available 4 years ago that are available now that you're using? And then also, what types of tools don't exist today that you would love to see so that you can integrate them into your workflow to improve the R&D throughput?
Yeah, so a couple of thoughts. My personal, I probably spend most of my time either in Claude Code or in versions of Lovable. Create anything, just release today have a cool version of V0, Lovable, whatever, right? And it depends on what I'm trying to do. If I'm actually trying to do something, I'm in Claude Code. If I'm trying to speculate about something, I'm in one of the sort of text to app builders. Stuff that we use internally, Claude Code, obviously Cursor and Windsurf and all of those as well. There's one I heard about recently. Is it called Augment? It's another engineering tool. It seems to be quite popular. Then like I believe there's a lot of like smaller tools that do like things like pull request review and all that sort of stuff. Like these agents that live on GitHub issues and comment and stuff like that. Then like some folks are using Devon as well. I guess outside of that, other AI tools I depend on greatly, aside from the models themselves, is things like Granola for like meeting notes summary, etc. are awesome. Um, what do I wish existed? Something I see that I think AI could really nail, but I just think it needs a bit of work is a code migration tool. So like here is a big bag of code, a React component or an Ember component or like, an iOS app or whatever. I actually think like it is quite translatable and attackable to turn that into something else. And I remember like I think it was Amazon said that like, because of AI, they managed to turn what would have been like a 7-month project to move to the latest version of Java into like 2 weeks or something like that. And I remember thinking at the time, that I'm surprised was even 2 weeks. But I'm actually more so I'm surprised that there is still a lot of products running around on very old frameworks or very old code. And I actually think the maintenance and the keeping products and frameworks up to date, I think that will probably get a lot easier in the future. So like I'm curious to see, for example, what does the next Rails upgrade look like, right? So Intercom is a big Rails monolith, and what I'd love to see is like somebody be like, "Hey, here's Rails 8 or whatever," but more importantly, here is an LLM that is brilliant at taking Rails 7 apps and bringing it to Rails 8 or whatever, some version of that, right? I think that's something that would be like, I think it's quite attackable. It might not be that lucrative. Maybe it ends up being an open source thing instead. But I actually think it would be really valuable to the industry because just think how much frantic time is pissed away to do things like this that ultimately doesn't really produce any new user value. Sure, like it might close off some security attack vectors, or it might like it change performance in some aspects, or it might increase the readability or whatever. But like generally speaking, users don't give a shit if none of those things matter. So like I think there's a lot of areas like that I think could matter I hope people attack.
Got it. You had moved from Ember to React, right?
We are still moving. Like Ember runs deep, right? So I think our inbox and a few other components were built in Ember, and we're moving to React. And again, like we are doing this, and the AI is definitely helping. But I suspect in a year or two, you can like literally say, please take this GitHub link and rewrite it in React, and maybe it'll just work it out. That might sound appallingly naive, but maybe I'll be right in 2 years.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to go back to the piece where you said that you have designers now that are pushing code to prod. How are you facilitating that AI literacy improvement process? Is that something where you're setting a milestone for the designers and then they're expected to figure out how to do that? Or are there initiatives that you're taking on internally to facilitate that and just maybe streamline that process, maybe provide them with resources and opportunities to ask questions?
I think with the right engineering or whatever, I think what you'll get is like sorry, with the right design team, you'll get a high appetite for this. Ultimately, the best designers are not motivated by Figma files; they're motivated by impact, and impact means things that actually happen in the world that like drive real outcome. And design is ultimately about solving problems, not like pushing pixels or whatever. So I think when you have that respect for your craft at the right level, and you care about your impact more than you care about just like your loyalty to your craft, you'll see AI not as a threat, which is the way I think a lot of the more pixel focused designers see it, but you'll see it as just another way in which you could potentially drive more impact. And certainly, we've always tried to hire people like that. And but I think when we made the decision, Emmett, who's our head of design, he made the decision. I think he was on the 1st of August. He basically posted to say like, we're now done. We have 100% of adherence to like AI powered designers producing code. I think he probably just said this is what he wants, and said, I remember like there was a few hack days and scrap days where people were just like playing around and learning the things. But and for what it's worth, just as a side note, another way that this can go wrong is it's good to have hack days. It's good to have like, let's all like, play with some tools and see what's possible. I think do that, but then very quickly get into production, because there's a big difference. It's like, we all know people who love Lovable, but then I say, hey, did you ever put that live? And they say, oh no. And it's like, why? Oh, well, she's, didn't know how to do a database. Or you kind of, you realize there can still be quite a canyon between a cool rendering of the front end of an app and the actual thing live on the internet. So very quickly for us, what that looked like was like, hey, it turns out to actually deploy Intercom, you need to have Git running on your laptop. Does anyone have that? Do our design team have that? You sort of start there and you realize, oh shit, there's actually the entire like dev tooling of Intercom comes under question when we say, hey, it's not just engineers using it. So there was a lot of like behind the scenes changes we had to make just to make it easy for any designer who onboards now to get a laptop that is running all of the stuff, so that they can actually deploy Intercom themselves. So anyway, there's a lot of that behind the scenes. After that, I think it's like genuinely make a declaration of what it is, what types of designers you want, and what types of designers will have like a bright and like lucrative future here. And that includes, we're now going to be a design team that pushes to production, and that's now part of the job. And I think, again, those things can sound scary to say, but you have to, if you're not scaring yourself in this transition, I don't think you're doing it for real. I think the non-scary version would be like, it'd be cool if everybody could show me a Lovable app by Friday. They'll do that, no problem. It's different when you say, hey, instead of filing a ticket in GitHub issues to say that you need the banner moved, you're going to log into, or you're going to like open up, whatever, Claude, and you're going to say move the banner, and you're going to verify it's moved, and you're going to push that to production. And in doing so, you'll get way better at this whole thing. And like, as much as I was excited about the day when we had 100% of designers crossing the mark and shipping, I'm actually really excited for what that looks like in a year. Because like this wasn't a one-time thing that they're all going to do one screen check and they walk away. This is the new way we work, which means these people are like literally day one engineers in a lot of cases. They'll be like year one engineers soon, and that's when it gets really interesting. Right? That's when they actually really have a good sense of how to constructively build software really fast. And then we have an incredible army.
Is the same expectation set for the product team? Are they also pushing code as well?
I don't know for sure that every single one of them is in the exact same state as the design org, but I have seen a lot of product managers push changes to production, usually honestly, around copy, content, dialogues, like taking links out, removing beta tags. All again, like these all sound like tiny things, but there's such little paper cuts in in any engineering org, and now it's entirely doable by PMs. So there's a lot of that going on. But I don't know if I'm not sure. I must check in and see, do we actually have aspirations to have PMs do it as well? Like in Intercom, the way it works is PMs own the problem, designers own the solution, engineers own the execution. The latter two things have obviously blurred now because design and execution are now becoming the same thing. But I think we've never previously asked for PMs to actually like be great designers per se. And so I don't know if we want a not great designer making a design decision and pushing it for production. So we'll see.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it kind of makes sense because the LLMs are really great at code augmentation. They're not so great at design augmentation just yet. So the bridge between product and design is just not something that is maybe as fleshed out as between design and engineering. So it makes sense intuitively. And you hinted at these hack days. I read somewhere that you designated Mondays and Tuesdays for AI training blocks. Is that still the case, or was that a temporary initiative?
I believe that was a temporary initiative. That was basically while we were warming everyone up to the idea of like wanting everyone to use the best tools available, basically. And we still have forthright, like, so I don't think we're doing them anymore. We might be doing them with like new hires or something like that. Just one interesting aspect of that is we have yet to fully converge on what we believe to be the right AI engineering tool. We're not really ones in general for mandating everyone has to use whatever VS Code or something. But there's quite a diversity of tools right now. You've people on Windsurf, Cursor, Claude Code. I think it's called Augment, and perhaps one or two others as well that I forget, GitHub Copilot or whatever. So the change, this is a challenge for all those companies too. Right now, you can hot swap from any one of those. They're totally stateless and they have no memory or anything, so it doesn't really matter which one you use. But I think I'm noticing that like the cursor rules file for designers that sets out all the sort of the pre-prompts or whatever, that's getting quite long and intricate, which means that if you're using Windsurf and you can't use it, it might be messy or whatever. So like I suspect we will probably want to converge soon, but we haven't.
Yeah, I think Toby at Shopify had tweeted something along these lines just yesterday about how you have all these different rules files. There's no universal standard, and same thing for MCP.
I'm sure someone will come up with the abstract standard from which everything, and then that'll become a new standard, etc. We know how all this is going to go, but yeah.
Yeah, I've read this term recently. It's called AI sprawl. Companies are adopting a ton of different AI tools, and there's some challenges in managing the complexity, governance, compliance, et cetera, across those tools. Is that something that you're also experiencing as you lean into AI heavily? And
I used the phrase earlier, like creative messiness or whatever it was. I said, like, it's kind of chaotic kind of creativity. I think we're still in that period where it will be very premature for us to make any big decisions. And if you asked us like 2 years ago, what's the right tool, we would have said GitHub Copilot, because that was who was number one right then. And then if you asked us a year ago, we might have said Cursor. And if you ask us today, we might say Claude. But like in practice, I'm going to guess we have a load of seats on all of those and they're not all getting used. And that's a sprawling of tools. It's a sprawling of cost, etc. But like there has to be a cleanup at some stage. But like, I don't want to, I personally wouldn't be motivated to do it prematurely. I think, let the players play and we'll work out where we sit in like a year's time or something like that, maybe longer. But I just like the environment is too dynamic and chaotic to try and make any like, I wouldn't be signing a 3-year contract for any of these products, you know what I mean? So like, I'm kind of like, yeah, like let's, let chaos reign supreme and we'll work out what the actual right setup is in a while. Just the only thing I want to avoid is people being like stuck in their ways. Like we need the freedom to change. So we might converge hard on something today and then decide actually it's a bad idea and let's use a different tool tomorrow. And that kind of has to be okay.
I feel like that's a general theme throughout the conversation is just embracing the chaos, being action oriented, and then dealing with organizing things later on once the dust settles.
Yeah. And I think for what it's worth, like that's one of the things that larger companies struggle with because I think you can be so structured and so instrumented and so smooth sailing and so like kind of productive and not wasteful. And all of those things will work against you, like in the era of AI, because you will go down dead end cul-de-sacs and get nowhere with something and call that and but you needed to do that to find something else, but that's not productive. Your roadmap will bounce around the place. We've given up trying to roadmap any more than 6 months at a time. We've just literally stopped. It's just not worth it. Like we don't know what the future holds. But again, like that can be kind of quite surprising. And as a result, people jump from team to team and that can be quite messy. And there's so much of that, like that goes against the DNA of a larger company where again, like where you're supposed to be is structured and like, measurable and like predictable and all that sort of stuff. And yeah, I'd say it's a tough time probably to be a public company because embracing the chaos there is probably a lot more painful.
Yeah, I think I read somewhere you said something along the lines of it'll basically never be chill again.
I have, yeah, I got that phrase from somebody, but yeah, like that's like, I hope that's not true, but you should behave like it is, you know?
Good advice. Now, I'm curious to get your thoughts, and maybe you have some frameworks for this on how to assess a existing product and to understand the role that AI might play in it, whether AI makes sense to incorporate into the product, whether it doesn't, and if so, the considerations that you have to keep in mind.
Yeah, sure. Like I often liken this, it's like not the same order of magnitude. AI is way bigger, but like when the smartphone came out, I spent a lot of time telling people, hey, people now have a computer in their pocket that's like smaller and easier and more accessible and they can look and it can take photos and this and that and the other. And you need to work out what does that mean for your product. And like I remember talking to a guy from an expense tracking product and I was like, well, now everyone has a camera in their pocket and they have a receipt on the table and like obviously your product proposition has to change, because the idea of bringing the receipt home and blah, 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 like it's a totally different thing. And, slowly people adopted that mindset. And I think like with AI, it's just a much bigger transformation, which is ultimately you have to ask yourself the following. Like most people log into a SaaS product and they point and click and tap and type for quite a while and to get like through all these like Windows icons and like drop downs and all that sort of stuff, and they do it all to just get to some outcome, and that outcome might be like I've updated the project team or I've summarized the meeting or I have like changed the state of this employee's holiday vacation or whatever. And the things you have to ask yourself are what bit of their interaction to get to that final outcome, which is ultimately just an updated record somewhere. What bit of that like was necessarily human, and what bit could have been inferred? And if it could have been inferred, could it be reliably inferred, like as in like 99.9 or whatever? Or could it have been mostly reliably inferred, but with a human in the loop? So like you log in to just say approve or reject or edit, but most of the time the work's done for you. Um, and so your product proposition becomes how much human work is actually necessary to get the human to the end outcome that they want. And that might mean something like, building a little messenger window where you just write in, record that Haroon is on vacation from May 1st to May 9th, send, and then they put their phone away or whatever, and that's it. And that's a far better experience for somebody than the might of Workday, or if you know what I mean, right? Like in that, to do that same thing in Workday is like 11 clicks and 3 drop downs or whatever. And I just think like a lot of people need to reimagine their entire product to work out one, is there any human interaction in this at all? If you look at, say, what we've done with Film, we've realized that, like, hey, a lot of these things don't need any human oversight at all. We're like, it's not that we've made the human more productive. We've taken them out of the loop entirely. And now we've reduced to zero the amount of human toil, right? And then if there, so like, and a lot of times that will genuinely be an option. There'll be an agentic way to do the thing your product does. Um, if the human's still necessary, then you ask yourself, what's the optimal interface that we can offer them? And I really just think that like the old school UI of like Web 2 or like desktop of like clicking buttons and drop downs, I think that's far less effective when people can actually literally write what they want and get it. So like the vacation example is a perfect example. Like everyone knows how to write whatever it is they want. Not everyone knows the UI of a product. And there are like I have friends who work on a spreadsheet called equals, and with equals, you just literally express in English what it is that you want to happen in the spreadsheet. Like make this the average of the last 3 months rolling or whatever. And it's like, yep, grand, got it. I think people who use equals will never ever learn Excel. And I think that's a good thing, like as in they're still using Excel formulae, but it's just being hidden. So I think you can work out. So either do the work entirely or extremely augment the work in two ways by either like doing as much of it as you can to a high point of certainty and then looking for human validation. And then also adapting your UI to something that everyone can use without ever having to learn anything. Because that way you don't have, like, if you think about all the bullshit that hangs off software, like onboarding and all that, it's all there because people don't know how to use your product. But everyone knows how to write what it is they're here to do. So if I said to you, hey, you've never logged into this expense tracking platform before, where I need you to file an expense for last night's dinner, and all you have to do is select it from your photo library and hit file this as an expense. That, it turns out you're an expert in that product too, whereas that's not always the case. And so I think people need to reimagine your UI in this period as well. And then ultimately, there's a lot of other stuff that will fall out of this. You'll have to change how you price your product because now you can't sell seats anymore. You're now selling work. You'll need to think about who your buyer is because oftentimes, like say the buyer of Fin is often not the head of support. It's actually the head of support's manager, which might be the COO or something like that. And that's because ultimately they're the ones who are like looking at the whole sort of business metrics, sort of COGS structure, if you like, cost of goods sold structure. So like your buyer might change, your brand might change. You're now going to be an AI first company. How you build software will have to change to our earlier conversation about your price. So like, there's a full like multi-steps, full stack transition your whole company has to go through. But I do think it starts with the product because ultimately for software businesses, your product kind of is what you are, and then everything kind of flows backwards from that. So I think the first point to ask is like, if I was building my startup today, like July or August 2025, in a world fully native AI, GPT-5's just being released, blah, 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 what would I actually build? And the distance between your current product and that is actually like it's proportionate with like the chances of you dying here. Like if you're really, really far away from what you should have had, you should start hustling and start becoming the company you wish you were.
Great advice, Des, and really appreciate you being generous with your time. I know we're running on time here, but as a last question, I'm curious to learn about what the most surprising insight has been as you've undergone this incredible AI transformation.
I think the thing that has caught me off guard most often has been how quickly things that were definitely, definitely not going to be possible or happen soon have happened 7 weeks later. And I say that not just from like the new model launched and it can do X or whatever, but like there's been numerous projects in Intercom where like really smart people have expressed high skepticism that this thing will work, probably won't work. We should, we'll give it another week and we'll see. And oftentimes we've like taken that on board quite literally and said, all right, let's go back, let's go a different direction, only to realize somebody, in the evening hours wouldn't let go of this idea, and they kept poking and scratching at it. And then in 6 weeks' time, someone's like, hey, sorry, it turns out this is actually totally the right way to build it. And then we have that. So this is a time of like low certainty, and I think you should embrace the uncertainty, because if someone, the more confident somebody is, the more likely that they're kind of like, full of shit or wrong or whatever. I remember like when we released our memo about 2x, like doubling the productivity of AI, there was like two types of responses I got consistently. One was people saying, there's not a chance you could double productivity with AI. It's not even close. If anything, you'll have productivity with AI, right? And my answer to those people was, dude, you need to play with the models more, because like, Jesus, it's way better than you think. And then the other response I got was 2x, you should be 10xing. And I'm like, dude, you also need to play with the models more, because that's not easy either. But the more certain someone is, the more I think they're trying to be a keynote speaker and actually not trying to speak from a depth of experience or lessons from the field or whatever. Because I just think so many conversations and Intercom end up with a kind of a, let's find out, and I think that's an okay thing. That's an okay place to be.
Great advice. Well, really appreciate it, Des. And where can folks find you?
Yeah, I'm Des Traynor. Our company's Fin, so it's Des Traynor on Twitter and fin.ai. And if you want to email me, it's just des@fin.ai.
Awesome. Thanks so much for your time.
Cool. Thank you.
AutoSkills helps teams go from AI curious to AI ready. We run tailored workshops to uncover where AI has the biggest impact in your business, whether that's automating repetitive tasks, cutting hours out of your daily workflows, or choosing the right mix of tools and custom solutions. It's practical, hands on, and built to get your team using AI for work that matters. Book your free 30-minute AI readiness audit at autoskills.ai.